A very good evening and welcome to Biz First in Focus. Joining us today for a discussion on the economic condition of the country and the social aspects of the economy in this country is Emeritus Professor of Sociology from the University of Colombo, Professor Siri Hettige. A very good evening, Professor.
Very good evening.
Professor, starting off, the rupee is depreciating, the economy of the country seems to be in a mess. What is the main issue here?
Well, I think we should not really gloss over these issues. They are basically manifestations of certain structural problems that are very much there in the economy, and we have really not been able to address some of these structural problems in the economy and also society, I would say, and that is why we tend to really discuss issues that come to the surface, like what you just mentioned. But I think we have to really look at what is really underneath, what is really driving some of these things that come to the surface and create a big discussion, debate, and I think we certainly have to look deeper.
So basically what you're saying is the key issue here is the structural imbalance in the Sri Lankan economy.
Absolutely. I think we all know that any economy has several sectors, and in this country we have been talking about the three sectors continuously. We have been talking about agriculture, and we have been talking about industry, and then we have been talking about services. And I think here today we have a situation where we tend to emphasize services almost at the expense of agriculture and industry. Now, as a result, I see an imbalance being created continuously, and I think this is really putting a lot of pressure on not only people but also on various aspects of the economy, like for instance the currency itself.
So you mentioned, Professor, you mentioned three aspects of the Sri Lankan economy: agriculture, services and industries. Let's specify on these. Let's first speak about agriculture. Agriculture is the backbone of many countries, as before the conversation you mentioned, is the backbone of many even developed countries that rely heavily on technology. How is the situation of the agriculture here in Sri Lanka?
No, agriculture is not only an economic domain, it is also a social and a cultural domain. People value what they produce, both not just in terms of their nutritional value, but also in terms of their cultural meanings, food habits, and also traditions, and so on and so forth. Now, I was in Switzerland last week, and I was traveling around the country, and I was really surprised that they pay so much attention to agriculture, particularly the things that small farmers produce in Switzerland. But I mean, we know Switzerland by various things that come to this country from Switzerland. Like for instance, we have Nestle. Nestle is one of the largest corporations present in many parts of the world, including Sri Lanka. And we all know about chocolates coming from Switzerland and so on and so forth. And then it is a country which produces very good watches and so on. I mean perfect machines and so on. So the point is that it is a highly industrialized country, and of course it is also a highly developed service economy, like financial sector of the country. I don't have to tell you about. Exactly. So the point is that but the point is that even in such a country like Switzerland, if they put so much emphasis on agriculture and value agriculture, not just for what they what the agriculture sector offers to them in terms of agricultural commerce, but also in terms of cultural and social significance of agriculture. Now, I think this is true for all countries in the world. It's not just Switzerland. I think in Sri Lanka, when we talk about agriculture, we talk about food security, because we would like to have food security, because our people should have food security. We know that even in an agricultural country like Sri Lanka, we have a big malnutrition problem. I mean, data is coming out of the various institutions. So the point is that we have not been able to ensure that almost every one of these every person in the country is given enough nutritious food.
It's kind of ironic that Sri Lanka has to worry about food security because we were once known as the granary of the Indian
Ocean. Absolutely. And the other thing is, Sri Lanka is not a small city state like Singapore. We are a country with a large hinterland. Like for instance, we still have about 70% of our people living in the countryside. And we have a vast, countryside where we have developed agricultural, infrastructure, irrigation infrastructure. And we have settled, millions of people in all parts of the country to do what? To produce food. But the point is that when, these people come under pressure, economic and social pressure, they don't care, they run away. And that is exactly what these people in the countryside have been doing. Now you can see we have 1.5 million three-wheelers. Now most of these people are from rural areas and they have run away. And they are driving three-wheelers. Now, the point is whether they would have been found more productive, more secure, more healthy, employment in other parts of the country. Now, similarly, we have 1.6 million people working in other countries, mostly in the Middle East. We hear the stories coming from the Middle East about Sri Lankan workers, particularly women, undergoing all kinds. So, the point is that I would say we have totally mismanaged our countryside in terms of making use of the resources, both human and material, in order to meet the needs of the people, not only living in the countryside but in the rest of the country as well. And then of course we move on to the next sector, industrial sector. I don't have to tell you how important the industrial sector is because we are living in an industrial...
Professor, we will cross over to a short commercial break, and when we get back we will continue our discussion on the economic status of the country, the social aspects to it, so on and so forth. We will be specifically discussing about the industrial sector here in Sri Lanka. Don't go anywhere, you're watching Biz First in Focus. Welcome back. You're watching Biz First in Focus. We are in discussion with Emeritus Professor on Sociology, Professor Siri Hettige, regarding the social aspects here in Sri Lanka, the economic aspects, so on and so forth. Professor Siri Hettige, getting on with our discussion, we promised our viewers that we will discuss about the industrial sector here in Sri Lanka. Shall we continue our discussion?
Well, the point is that after agriculture, naturally we turn to industry because we are living, at a time when we depend so much on things coming from industry, not just from Sri Lanka but from the rest of the world in particular. So the point is that we have to make sure that we produce. We can't be producing all the industrial goods that we require because basically when you look at international trade, a lot of industrial goods are being imported around. So, but the point is that we can't be 100% dependent on imports when it comes to industrial, things that we require. So, the point is that we have to figure out how we could also, increase industrial output in this country. And these days we are not only talking about, labor intensive industries, we are talking about technology intensive industries. Now, of course, in Sri Lanka we started in 1977. Of course, we had an industrial past. As you know, we had import substitution industrialization from the 1950s, and then of course in the 1977 we changed our strategy, economic development strategy, and we basically wanted to have export-led industrialization, and there we invited people to come and invest in garments and textile industry and so on and so forth. So the point is that that the industries that were there before 1977 by and large collapsed over a very short period of time, right. and of course we never managed to sort of resuscitate them. And of course there can be all kinds of discussions and arguments about this, but anyway that's not the point. The point is that the labor advantage that we had in 1976 allowed us to attract, or rather enabled us to attract industrial investment into this country. But that labor advantage we lost over the last several decades. For instance, today, I mean, we have not only a labor shortage, nominally if you like, but we also have a big problem with the skills. I mean, the point is that you have to make the transition from labor intensive to technology intensive industrialization when labor is no longer cheap and available in abundance. And that is exactly what we would have done over the last 40 years.
We should have done.
But the last 40 years, what we would have done, we would have seen this coming. We would have seen this coming. Our people were running away to the Middle East, to the rest of the world to find employment. And there, we have now about 1.6 million people employed outside the country. That's about, more than 20% of the labor force. And then we have also, a large proportion of our labor force employed in the services, in urban areas and so on and so forth. So the point is that we just do not have the labor advantage that we had in 1976, 77. So the point is that we would have done our homework. We would have basically invested in technology. We would have invested in our education so that we would have produced people with the technological skills, so that those people would have really helped us establish technology intensive industries. Now that is exactly what East Asian.
Speaking about investment in education, Professor, recently there was a proposal to issue tabs to all students and teachers in the A-level section. They allocated billions and billions of rupees for this. Do you believe that this is a viable investment for the promotion of education?
Absolutely. I think this is really incredible, I would say, because you see, the point is you have to look at the structure of our education system. You have to look at the structure of our school system. You have to look at the conditions that prevail in much of the education system, in not only in the general education system, but also in the higher education system. So the point is that we never bothered about improving skills in this country. We were basically producing people with certificates,
the same skills,
O-level, A-level, university degree, and nothing more. And then look at the language issue. I mean, this is a country where only 3 languages are being spoken. Now, in a country where only 3 languages are being used, it is only 2 languages that would solve the problem. If we are bilingual, doesn't matter what the second language is, our problem is virtually solved. Now, to go to, let's say Europe, European Union, 28 countries, 23 languages. And what did they do over the last 30 to 40 years? They basically ensured that their young children and young people acquired multilingual skills. And in many countries, they teach at least 4 languages now. I mean, I know I lived and worked in Switzerland for a year, and I know how important it is for them to learn, several languages, because they are surrounded by countries where they speak different language. So the point is that, we haven't done our homework. I mean, as far as the education system is concerned. I mean, if you can't, ensure, the learning of a second language, I think forget about that education system, because, we are living in a globalized world today. Today, people have to connect, whether they like it or not, they have to connect. If you migrate, even for a year to work, I mean, you can't be using your own language in that country. You have to be able to communicate in a language that those people understand. You expect them to learn Sinhala, in that country? Do you expect them to learn Tamil in that country?
Exactly.
No, because the point is, it is up to you to adapt. It is not for the people who are living in other countries to adapt to our situation. So the point is, we have failed miserably to teach even the second language in this country. So that's why I'm saying that we have left fundamental issues unaddressed, and we basically basically deal with the issues that come to the surface. I think,
like you said before, Professor, we only produce people with the paper qualifications. Our education system has been reduced to a point where it judges the ability of a fish by its capacity to climb a tree.
No, it's not only that. Actually, it is also the whole world view. You see, the point is that in the developed countries, we know that only a very small percentage of young people are obsessed with religion. Only about 3%. If you take any European countries, but whereas in this country, more than 80% of our young people who are supposed to be educated, are so religious. I mean, like, these are not opinions. These are this is information coming from nationally conducted surveys. And, this is really very important because, orientation to the world. I mean, if you don't have a scientific outlook, if you don't have a scientific outlook, what are you talking about? Talking about technology? I mean, technology is science. It is not based on religion, isn't it? I mean, I don't have to tell you that.
Exactly.
So the point is that, we have a long way to go, and I don't think that we are in a position to really address these very deep-rooted structural problems in our society and in our economy, and as a result, we are getting into more and more difficulties rather than,
finding solutions to instead of finding solutions to our problems, we are in a state where we are creating more and more problems for ourselves.
Yeah.
On that note, Professor, we cross over to a short commercial break. On the other side of this commercial break, we'll be speaking about the service sector in Sri Lanka and how it affects the social aspect of Sri Lanka as well as the economic aspect. Stay tuned. You're watching Biz First in Focus. Welcome back to Biz First in Focus. We are in discussion with Emeritus Professor of Sociology at Colombo University, Professor Siri Hettige. Professor, before the break, we promised our viewers that we will speak about the service sector, the final sector in the three sectors that we discussed that affect the social and economic aspects, among other sectors as well. So, regarding the services sector, you said at the start of the program that Sri Lanka is more and more focusing on the service sector while disregarding the agricultural and industrial sector. Since Sri Lanka is focusing on the service sector, are we doing it right?
Well, I think the point is that we have to basically adapt to a very fast changing environment. I mean, naturally, we know that the world is so interconnected through, modern technology. I mean, the internet is, ever present wherever we are, wherever we go. And as a result, you don't really get disconnected when you are away from your country. I remember when I was studying in Australia in the late 70s, I mean, we hardly had any, communication with our families, on a day-to-day basis because it was not possible. But whereas today, you can be in any part of. So the point is that we'll have to basically recognize the need to really build our service industries, whether it is telecommunication, whether it is internet based industries, services, and so on and so forth, and then even governance can be very much improved with the use of modern technology and so. But the point is that you have to have a population which is very much attuned to this. Now, it doesn't come to you naturally, it has to be
instilled in you.
And that is where the education comes in. And I think we have really not done enough to really get these ideas across to the wider public. I mean, for instance, we have to bring science back in. Science has to be in the foreground, not in the background. Whereas in Sri Lanka, we have religion in the foreground, science in the background. So the point that I am trying to make here is that we need to ensure that our young people acquire the scientific know-how and acquire the scientific orientation, and also being able to really look at things critically and analytically. I think that is what scientific outlook is all about. And that I think is important. So for you to do that, you have to invest in education. Unfortunately, we have not been able to invest enough in education in this country. I can give an example. We have been basically hovering around 1.6% of the GDP for education, whereas the UN has recommended that we have a minimum of 3% of the GDP allocated for education. But the fact of the matter is that we have not been able to do that. Now, that is a major gap right now. And the second point is investment and research and development. Investment.
But Professor, do you simply believe by increasing the amount of money that we spend on education would simply solve the problem in education?
Not at all. Not at all. I think the point is that is where we have the policy making bodies. We have established institutions but the fact of the matter is that we don't really make those institutions, we do not make those institutions, we make use of those institutions to deliver. Say for instance, we have a National Education Commission. Now the National Education Commission can actually come up with recommendations and so education reform, educational programs and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that that again is in the background. Education Commission should have been in the foreground. Now it has always been in the background for the last 40 years. I mean last 30 years I would say. So the point is that things that should be in the foreground are pushed to the background in this country. And what is the face of education in this country? I mean, we have a minister always coming out and saying things, no? I mean, but whereas we need experts in that field to come out and talk about education so that the people get enlightened. People get enlightened, because we know that I think there is a problem here, because in this country, credibility of the politicians has gone down. Unfortunately, I don't like that, but unfortunately that has happened. I think we should recognize, and as a result, we should push to the background, push to the forefront people who have credibility. I think our public officials have credibility. We know that people believe when an official comes forward and makes a statement. because he has
a better credibility than a politician.
That's right. And similarly, we have knowledgeable people. Our universities have experts, and we know that. And I think those people have a much better position in society to really enlighten the wider public about what is really going on. So what I'm getting at is that research and development is critical. Actually, the world, when you look at the present day situation in the world, it is on the basis of research and development that countries compete. Now, how did East Asia come forward and now they have even overtaken South Asia? And that is simply because they have done their homework, they have put so much money into education, so much money into research and development. And you can see what is coming. And now say we are talking about industrialization. Almost all the industrial products that we are consuming in this country come from largely East Asia, and the rest from Europe and America.
Japan.
Now look at those countries. Now America still is leading in research and development. Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore. That's in Asia. But you go to Europe, all the European countries. So the point is that they put money where it matters. This is a country where we can't put money where it matters. I think that is where our crisis is. And I think unless and until we strike a balance between these three sectors, agriculture has an enormous potential, and we have to tap that potential. And that we had the infrastructure. We basically neglected that infrastructure in this country. We established research stations in all parts of the country. We established national institutions for agriculture.
To no avail.
That's the point. No, but I think those institutions still there can be resuscitated. And there are people who can really make a contribution to agricultural sector in these institutions. And there are very knowledgeable people in our universities, and I think those people should be mobilized to resuscitate agriculture. Industry has to be established on the basis of science and technology, not on the basis of let's say assembly lines. Basically it is not a matter of bringing everything
things and then assembling it here and exporting it again.
The value added depends not on that value added. Now say a lot of the things that we produce here, even garments, what is the proportion of the value added in garments? Because fabrics, all the fabrics, most of the fabric is imported. But whereas we in this country had many textile factories. I was going to school in Galle. I was going past several textile factories in Galle. This was in the late 60s. Now you see, now I'm talking about late 60s. Now we are in 2028. So the point is, now you are a young man, but I have lived in this country long enough to have seen what really happened in this country.
And the change that has been.
Leave my university education, overseas training, all that out. My experience in this country, having lived here for so long, is enough for me to really reflect on these things. And that is exactly what is lacking today at the highest level in this country. And I'm really sad to see the kind of discussions happening in Parliament, for example, because we learned a lot you know, as school kids, we learned a lot
By
from our
watching
parliamentarians.
Exactly.
And I have traveled in a bus with several MPs and ministers when I was traveling from Colombo to Galle, like W. Dhanayaka and so on and so forth. I learned a great deal from, you know, such eminent people, and I cannot think of many people around.
Well, I don't think you will be able today to travel in a bus with any MPs due to their entourages and their expensive vehicles. Thank you very much, Professor Siri Hettige, for joining us this evening. And as far as our discussion goes, what I gathered was that the sociology, the economic problems in our country have been intertwined, and a lack of a proper address to these issues over the years has created a stagnate of all of these issues. And thus, if we do not take measure now and address these issues, we will be facing far greater consequences in the near future as well as in the years to come. Once again, thank you very much, Professor Siri Hettige, for joining us this evening. Thank you very much for watching. You're tuned in to Biz First in Focus.